Because a lot of these documents that we're going to engage are so old, and because they're so unfamiliar to you, more often than not, I'm going to include some type of information that helps you understand what these are. Most of the time, you're going to be introduced to these sources through the presentations, through the readings you do in Berger earlier on in the week, and almost always there's going to be some type of connection to an editor or somebody who provides an outside secondary, so not written at the same time, but a secondary view of what this source is. So with the Epic of Gilgamesh, that was assigned on the first day of class along with the other readings. And if you spent a little time skimming through there, you'll get the type of information that helps you understand what this source is. So Epic of Gilgamesh, you see an example of it right here. It's something that's written in cuneiform, but it predated these cuneiform tablets we have. It probably goes back at least 3,000 years, and it's something that would have been told from one person to another. So right off the bat, knowing that, we can recognize that this is probably going to change a lot over time. Think about stories that you hear told a lot. Parts of them get left out. The big things get magnified, kind of the standard fishing tale, right? The fish was this big, then it was this big, then it was this big. And with all of these types of stories that start as oral traditions, we're going to see lots of them. One of the things we can do is say, okay, this is a story, it's fiction, but there also seem to be elements of this that give us an idea of what these people thought, how they saw the world around them. So let me real quickly summarize some of the stuff you should have read already, and perhaps tease out some of the elements that would be important for us. So we've already said that this is at least 3,000 years old. It's something that's used by lots of different civilizations, and it shows them kind of a common heritage. We know that there's a protagonist, a main figure. His name's Gilgamesh. We know who Gilgamesh is. He's a king. He's a king of a place called Uruk. And right off the bat, we're told something about the type of traits he has. So if this is a story about a king, and his traits are identified, we can probably guess that people are going to focus on the things that they like about him and the things that they don't. One of the most identifying features of Gilgamesh is that he's part god and part man. He's 2/3 god and 1/3 man. So that means he's kind of in this in-between realm. And so people would see in him traits that they would see in their gods. He'd also have traits that are linked to humans, right? So he's going to be fallible. He's also going to die, which is something that doesn't happen to the gods. How he's described earliest off is that he's got a bunch of courage. Probably a great thing for a king back in this day, right? You don't necessarily want somebody who's a bookworm, but you want somebody who can defend you when you have limited amounts of resources in the deserts of Mesopotamia. He's described as beautiful. We don't really know what that means, but he's probably ripped. He has great strength. Again, an awesome trait that you want in a king, not necessarily a president today. You don't want him to be able to go and bench press your body weight, but you do want him to be able, in ancient Mesopotamia, to lead an army to battle. He's described as the greatest king ever, but one of the things that's funny early on, or at least interesting early on, is people don't like him. Just because he's a great king doesn't mean everything he does is great. And why don't they like him? Hopefully you caught that they don't like him because he sleeps with their women. So he's somebody who thinks he is entitled to these things, right? He isn't necessarily looking out for the welfare of his people all the time. Instead, he's using his position of power to benefit himself. Right? This rubs people the wrong way, and it suggests to them that he doesn't necessarily have great kingly skills. What happens because of this? Well, the gods decide to create somebody who's going to throw a wrench into this for Gilgamesh. So right off the bat, we see that gods are directly intervening in humans' affairs. These people would have believed that things that happen in daily life happen because the gods make them happen. And you know from John Green's Crash Course in World History video, they see the gods as being very violent and unpredictable and not really liking folks. They personified the gods with traits like wind and sun and rain, and the biggest jerk god there was the god of the wind, the god of storms who destroyed crops. These gods then are responsible for kind of the daily life of these people. They intervene, right? They're directly involved. And so what the gods do to kind of take Gilgamesh down a notch is they create this guy named Enkidu. We've got in Enkidu what is a great, a term we use in English, a great juxtaposition, right? Enkidu on one hand is kind of a raw, pure, untouched form of nature. Gilgamesh is supposed to be civilized. And so if we're trying to think about what makes folks civilized, Enkidu is presented as somebody who's uncivilized, Gilgamesh is somebody who's civilized. You can put them next to each other and compare those traits. Enkidu doesn't live in cities. He hunts and gathers. He moves around. He certainly doesn't have currency. But eventually he is civilized, and I love this element here too. He's civilized by the touch of a woman, whether she's a prostitute or not. He comes in, Enkidu that is, he points out a lot of the problems of Gilgamesh. He challenges him to a fight, and even though Gilgamesh wins, he steps back and he reflects, and he starts thinking about maybe some of what Enkidu says has some merit, and he changes who he is. He cultivates other traits. Mercy, he doesn't kill Enkidu. Humility, he's more humble. Those go along with his courage and his nobility. So all of these types of things tell us that it's a good story about a guy named Gilgamesh, but it's also something that would teach people lessons as they heard it. How should kings behave? How should people behave? What makes folks civilized? There are other stories that are given in that introduction about them going and killing a horrible beast named Humbaba in the forest. Forests are bad. Why? Well, because think about any fairy tale, right? Don't go into the forest, you can't see things. But for these folks, they lived in an area without trees. Trees are important to build things on one hand, but on the other hand, lots of scary things live in the forest. Don't go there. And in going to the forest, killing this evil creature and bringing back trees, now Gilgamesh also tames some of this wild world, shows that he can, but on the flip side, he infringes on the gods. I'm going to leave that introduction here a little bit, but what I want to do from here on out is think about the primary source we have assigned about Enkidu's dream. It's real short, and we'll dig into that on the next slide.